Welcome to the HFY Tales channel. Remember to like and subscribe if you like the story. Enjoy and take care. The vast expanse of Xithoria stretched before Captain Adam Hale, a sight unlike anything he had witnessed in all his years exploring alien worlds. Adam stood on the edge of a crystal ridge, overlooking the valley below. The landscape shimmered as the twin suns of Xithoria bathed the world in their golden light. Crystalline spires rose from the valley, reaching into the sky like fingers of glass, reflecting the light in a dazzling array of colors. Rivers of liquid silver snaked through the valleys, their surface shimmering under the twin suns' glow. Everything about this world seemed ethereal, fragile, yet ancient, just like its people. Adam adjusted his breathing mask, the thin atmosphere not suitable for humans. Despite the beauty of the world, there was a sense of unease in the air. His diplomatic mission had taken an unexpected turn since he had landed, and Xithoria's political situation was more volatile than his briefings had suggested. "Captain Hale, we need to move," a voice crackled in his earpiece. He tapped the communicator, turning to face his escort, Lieutenant Jarev, a tall Xithorian soldier with the sleek, silver-toned skin that all Xithorians possessed. Jarev's eyes gleamed, luminous against the backdrop of the crystalline city that loomed in the distance. "The elders will be waiting for you at the palace. They expect us to arrive before the sun set." Jarev's voice held the calm authority of a seasoned warrior, but Adam could sense an underlying tension. "Lead the way, Lieutenant," Adam replied, his gaze lingering on the horizon. The city, Serenith, as the Xithorians called it, stood proudly in the distance, its towers glinting in the light like precious gemstones. It was a city of history, a symbol of Xithoria's power and its deep connection to tradition. As they made their way down the crystal path, Adam couldn't help but think back to the mission that had brought him here. A fragile peace between Earth and Xithoria had been brokered after decades of tension. The Xithorians were an ancient race, steeped in tradition, their ways often misunderstood by humanity. Adam had been sent to cement that peace, to negotiate an alliance that would benefit both worlds. But there were rumors of factions within Xithoria that opposed this alliance, that believed their ways would be corrupted by human influence. And then there was the Xithorian royal family, with its own set of internal struggles. "You seem troubled, Captain," Jarev observed as they descended into the valley. "Is there something on your mind?" "Just thinking about how different your world is from mine," Adam said. "It's hard to fully understand your people's customs. I've studied, of course, but—" Jarev smiled faintly, though there was a hint of sadness in his eyes. "Our customs are ancient. They've been passed down through generations, but not all of us believe they are as infallible as the elders claim. Change is coming, Captain Hale, even to a world as old as Xithoria." Meanwhile, in the high towers of Serenith, Princess Zalara stood at her balcony, watching the valley below. Zalara was no stranger to the pressures of tradition. As a noblewoman of the Xithorian royal family, her life had been dictated by ancient laws she had little say in. Yet she could not deny the sense of duty that had been ingrained in her from birth. Xithoria's fate rested on the shoulders of those who followed the old ways, or so the elders believed. Her silver-toned skin shimmered in the fading light of the day, her eyes reflecting the hues of the twin suns. She had often wondered what life might be like beyond the confines of her world. The humans she knew were free in ways she could barely imagine. They didn't live by the constraints of rituals that governed every aspect of their existence. They didn't believe that life debts must be paid in the way her people did. But Zalara was not free. "Princess," a soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "Your presence is requested by the elders. Captain Hale will be arriving soon." Zalara turned to face the young servant, who bowed deeply. "I will join them shortly," she replied. As she gazed once more out toward the horizon, a flicker of movement caught her eye. Far in the distance, near the valley's edge, she saw a group of figures moving swiftly through the crystal fields. Too fast to be friendly, her heart quickened. "Sound the alarm," she commanded, her voice firm. "We're under attack." The sound of blaster fire ripped through the serene Xithorian valley. Captain Adam Hale ducked instinctively as a shot whizzed past his head, impacting the crystalline ground with a sharp crack. Sparks flew, and shards of the alien crystal shot into the air, catching the light from the twin suns. His escort, Lieutenant Jarev, had drawn his own weapon, scanning the horizon with sharp, trained eyes. "We're under attack," Jarev shouted, confirming Adam's immediate suspicion. Adam's mind raced. The diplomatic mission had been tense, but an ambush on Zethorian soil was more than unexpected. It was a sign that the rogue factions opposing the peace treaty were more powerful than anyone had anticipated. "Who are they?" Adam yelled over the chaos, pulling his sidearm from his belt. It was standard human military issue, nothing compared to the Zethorians' advanced energy weapons, but it would do in a pinch. Jarev didn't answer immediately. He fired a volley of shots into the distance, suppressing the advancing enemies, before finally growling, "They're from the Drathian sect, a militant group that opposes any alliance with Earth. They believe we are corrupting our traditions." "Perfect," Adam muttered, crouching behind a crystal outcrop. He fired a few shots, though the sheer distance between them and their attackers made it more symbolic than effective. "Can we reach the palace?" Jarev glanced behind them, then back at the approaching attackers. His expression hardened. "No, they'll overrun us before we make it. We need to hold them off here." A wave of unease settled over Adam. They were exposed out in the open, with only sparse crystal formations for cover. Worse, the attackers were closing in fast, their shapes growing clearer through the shimmering air. Clad in dark armor that contrasted starkly with the silver elegance of Zythoria, the Drathians were relentless, firing with the kind of determination that only zealots possessed. "We're sitting ducks here," Adam hissed, ducking as another blast struck near his position. He peeked around the corner and saw a flash of movement, a figure stumbling in the distance, far from the battlefield. It was Zalara. Her silken robes made her an easy target, as she tried to flee the onslaught, moving desperately toward cover. A Drathian soldier had already spotted her, lining up a shot. Without thinking, Adam bolted from his cover. "Captain Hale, what are you doing?" Jarev yelled after him, but Adam was already sprinting across the open terrain. The crystal ground was uneven under his boots, each step threatening to send him sprawling. But his focus was singular. Zalara. She was barely halfway to safety, and the Drathian was preparing to fire. With a grunt of effort, Adam pushed himself forward, arms pumping, closing the distance between him and the Zethorian princess. His pulse pounded in his ears, and for a brief moment, everything around him, the sounds of blaster fire, the shouts of Jarev, seemed to fade. Just as the Drathian took the shot, Adam leaped. He collided with Zalara, tackling her to the ground as the energy blast sailed over them, missing them by mere inches. They hit the crystalline ground hard, rolling behind a small ridge of crystal, but the impact winded him. He blinked, dazed for a moment, before looking down at her. "Are you all right?" he asked, his breath ragged. Zalara's wide, luminous eyes stared up at him. Her lips parted in shock. Her silvery skin shimmered faintly in the light, and for a moment Adam forgot the danger surrounding them. She nodded, still too stunned to speak. Another blaster shot brought him back to reality. He rolled off her and crouched low, pulling her close to the ground. "Stay down," he ordered, scanning for the nearest piece of solid cover. The Drathians wouldn't give up easily. Zalara's voice trembled as she finally spoke. You saved me." Adam didn't respond immediately. He fired a few more shots at the advancing enemies, knowing they were outnumbered and outgunned. His mind raced, trying to think of a way out of the situation, but all he could feel was Zalara's gaze on him, an intensity he hadn't expected. "It's not over yet," he said, pulling her further behind the ridge. "Just stay close to me." Before he could think of a better plan, reinforcements arrived. A squad of Zethorian royal guards surged into the valley, their blaster rifles lighting up the air with streaks of energy. The Drathians, outnumbered and taken by surprise, fell back, retreating toward the horizon in defeat. Adam exhaled in relief, collapsing against the crystal wall behind him. The adrenaline was still pumping through his veins, but at least, for the moment, they were safe. Zalara sat beside him, her hand trembling as she reached out to touch his arm. "You didn't have to save me," she whispered, her voice filled with an emotion he couldn't quite place. "But you did." He glanced over at her, offering a tired smile. It was instinct. She shook her head, her silver-toned hair cascading down her shoulders. It's more than that. You don't understand. Before she could say more, a new group of Zithorian soldiers approached, led by a high-ranking official, one of the elders, dressed in ceremonial robes that marked him as a leader of their people. "Captain Hale," the elder began, his voice deep and authoritative, "your actions today have saved Princess Zalara's life. You have performed a great service to our people." Adam nodded, still catching his breath. "I was just doing my duty." But the elder's expression remained solemn. "You have done more than that. According to the ancient laws of Zithoria, when a life is saved by another, a bond is formed, one that must be honored." Adam frowned, feeling a sudden tension in the air. "What do you mean?" The elder glanced at Zalara, who had lowered her gaze to the ground, her expression conflicted. "You have saved the princess, Captain Hale. By our traditions, this means you have invoked the law of the life debt. The princess's purity is now owed to you, as a bond of repayment." Adam's heart skipped a beat. "What? No, I didn't." "It is our way," the elder interrupted, his tone firm. "It has been our way for generations. To refuse would be to dishonor her and our people." The weight of the word sank in, and Adam looked at Zalara. Her expression told him everything. She hadn't wanted this, but tradition demanded it. And now, they were both caught in the middle of a ritual neither of them had asked for. "There must be some other way," Adam said, his voice barely above a whisper. But the elder's response was final. "There is no other way." The walk back to the palace was heavy with unspoken words. Zalara and Adam moved side by side, though a gulf of silence stretched between them. Around them, the royal guards escorted them through the glittering crystal pathways, the shattered remnants of the battle scattered across the valley floor. Adam's mind raced. He had faced diplomatic challenges before, tense negotiations with alien leaders, skirmishes that teetered on the edge of war. But this was something different, something far more personal. He had saved Zalara's life without hesitation, but the consequences of that action were far beyond anything he had anticipated. A life debt? Purity? How could these concepts still govern an advanced society? When they reached the palace, the guards bowed and departed, leaving Adam and Zalara in one of the private courtyards. The high crystal walls provided seclusion, while a fountain of shimmering water cast soft light over the space. The sounds of palace life were distant, leaving only the delicate whisper of water between them. Zalara broke the silence first, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry." Adam turned to face her, surprised. "What? Why would you apologize?" She looked away, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Because this is my fault. You didn't ask for this life debt. You didn't even know about our customs, and now you're trapped by them. I should have told you." Adam's heart softened at the sight of her distress. He had expected her to be angry, to be defensive, but instead she seemed lost. "Zalara, you don't need to apologize. You didn't ask to be saved, and I didn't do it for any kind of reward. I acted because it was the right thing to do." She nodded slowly, but her expression remained conflicted. "But here, on Zithoria, nothing is so simple. The elders, they'll expect you to follow through with the ritual. It's tradition, and defying it is seen as dishonorable." Her voice grew softer, more vulnerable. "And for me, it would bring shame upon my family. People would think I had rejected you, or that I wasn't worthy." Adam's breath caught at her words. The situation was far more complicated than he had realized. "This doesn't seem right, Zalara. You shouldn't be forced into this, just because of some tradition." Zalara turned to face him fully, her luminous eyes locking with his. "It's all I've ever known, Adam. My entire life has been dictated by these laws. From the moment I was born, I've been bound by them. Who I can speak to, who I can marry, how I must act as a noblewoman of Zithoria. And now, because of the life debt, I'm bound to you." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, the weight of her world seemed to press down on both of them. Adam felt a surge of empathy for her. This woman caught between duty and her own desires, bound by the expectations of her people. He took a step closer, his voice soft but firm. "Zalara, I don't want this, not like this. You deserve the right to choose your own path, your own future. There has to be another way. Zalara's gaze flickered with something, hope, perhaps, or maybe just a fleeting desire to believe there could be an alternative. There's always been another way, she said quietly, but no one's ever dared to choose it. Adam's brow furrowed. What do you mean? She hesitated, clearly weighing her next words carefully. There are whispers among some of the younger Zithorians, those who want change. They speak of reforming the old laws, of giving people the freedom to break from the past. But the elders, they hold too much power. If I were to defy the tradition, I would need support, both from within my own people and from someone outside, someone like you. Adam felt a glimmer of possibility. Are you saying we can fight this? Together? Zalara nodded, though her expression remained guarded. Maybe, but it's not just about you and me. It's about changing the way things are done here, about breaking free from centuries of rigid tradition. It won't be easy, and it could cost us everything. Adam stepped closer, his voice filled with quiet determination. I'm not afraid of that. If it means giving you the freedom you deserve, then I'll stand with you, no matter what it takes. Zalara's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, a mix of gratitude and sorrow. Thank you, Adam. I've never had someone fight for me before, not like this. The days that followed were a whirlwind of quiet rebellion. Adam and Zalara began meeting in secret, planning how they could challenge the life debt tradition without causing an outright scandal. They spoke with trusted allies, young Zithorians who had been quietly advocating for reform, and even some human diplomats who supported their cause. As they worked together, Adam and Zalara grew closer, their bond deepening beyond mere circumstance. They shared stories of their respective worlds, laughed over cultural misunderstandings, and spent long hours discussing what the future could look like if the weight of tradition was lifted. Adam found himself drawn to her, not just because of her beauty, but because of her strength, her intelligence, and her quiet defiance of a system that had held her captive for so long. Zalara, in turn, found herself trusting Adam in a way she had never trusted anyone before. He didn't see her as a symbol of purity or a prize to be claimed. He saw her as a person, someone worth fighting for. And that, more than anything, made her believe that change was possible. But as their plan began to take shape, so too did the dangers. The elders were suspicious, and whispers of dissent began to spread through the palace. Some of the older nobles were firmly against any deviation from tradition, while others remained uncertain, watching and waiting to see which way the winds would blow. One evening, as they met in the secluded garden near the palace, Zalara spoke the words that Adam had been waiting for. It's time, she said, her voice steady despite the weight of the decision. Tomorrow, I will stand before the elders and my family, and I will refuse the life debt ritual. I will defy the tradition, but I can't do it alone. Adam reached out, taking her hand in his. You won't be alone. I'll be right there with you. For a moment they stood in silence, the soft glow of the garden's crystal flowers casting gentle light around them. The world outside seemed far away, and yet it was closer than ever. Tomorrow, everything would change, for better or for worse. What happens after tomorrow? Zalara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Adam squeezed her hand gently, his voice filled with quiet resolve. We make our own path. The grand hall of the Zithorian palace was a sight to behold, its walls and floors carved from the same shimmering crystal that adorned the rest of the planet. The light of the twin suns filtered through the high, arched windows, casting dancing reflections across the space. It was beautiful, but also oppressive, a place where centuries of tradition weighed heavily on those who dared to challenge them. Adam stood just behind Zalara as they entered the hall. Around them, members of the Elder Council were already seated in a semicircle, their faces solemn, their robes flowing with the patterns of their ancient lineage. The air was thick with tension, and Adam could feel the eyes of the gathered nobles and dignitaries on him. Whispers echoed through the hall, but they fell silent as the two approached the central platform. You are here to honor the life debt tradition, Elder Valeth said, his voice booming with authority. He was one of the oldest members of the council, his long silver hair flowing like liquid metal, and his eyes cold and calculating. The ritual must proceed. There is no room for defiance. Adam's heart pounded in his chest, but he kept his gaze steady, glancing at Zalara. She stood tall, her chin raised, exuding an air of quiet strength. He knew that the next moments would define not only their futures, but the future of Zithoria itself. Zalara stepped forward, her voice steady as she addressed the elders. I understand the weight of tradition, and I respect the customs of our people. But I will not— She paused, her eyes flicking over to Adam before continuing. I will not participate in this ritual. I refuse to be bound by an ancient law that strips me of my choice. This life debt is my own to honor, and I choose not to fulfill it in the way tradition demands. Gasps echoed through the hall. Adam saw the shock in the faces of the nobles, the murmurs quickly spreading like wildfire. Defying such a sacred tradition was unheard of. It wasn't just scandalous, it was revolutionary. Elder Valeth's face darkened, and he leaned forward on his throne. You speak of defiance, Princess Zalara, but you forget that your very birthright is tied to these traditions. Without them, you have no claim to the respect and honor of your people. To reject the life debt is to reject your own lineage. Zalara's eyes flashed with determination. I do not reject my people. I reject the idea that my worth is measured by rituals that do not allow me to make my own choices. I am more than a symbol of purity. I am more than a tool for political alliances. The hall fell silent as the weight of her words settled. For a moment, no one moved, the tension suffocating. Then, a voice cut through the silence. She is right. It was Adam. He stepped forward, standing beside Zalara, his voice firm and unwavering. I have traveled across many worlds, and I have seen cultures as rich and diverse as Zithoria's. But true honor is not found in blindly following tradition. It's found in respecting each other's choices, in recognizing the right to decide our own futures. Elder Valeth's gaze shifted toward Adam, and his expression was one of disdain. You speak as an outsider, human. You do not understand the depth of what you are asking. Maybe not, Adam admitted, but I do understand that no tradition, no matter how sacred, should force someone into something they don't want. Zalara has the right to choose her own path, just as any of us do. There was a moment of stillness as the hall absorbed Adam's words. The elders exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. It was clear that this was not a matter they had anticipated, someone willing to stand against the very core of their belief system. The human speaks boldly, came a voice from the side. It was Elder Mira, a younger member of the council, known for her progressive views. Her gaze was sharp, but thoughtful. Perhaps we should consider what the princess and her savior are proposing. Valeth turned to Mira, his voice harsh. You would have us discard centuries of tradition for the whims of one princess and an outsider. You would throw our people's honor into chaos. Mira did not back down. I would have us evolve. The world is changing, Valeth. We cannot cling to the past forever. Even the most ancient of traditions must adapt to the times. We are forging alliances with new worlds, and those alliances will crumble if we do not learn to compromise. Another murmur ran through the hall. Some nodded in agreement, while others remained rigid, their faces hard with resistance. The divide between the traditionalists and the progressives was becoming more apparent by the second. Adam watched the tension unfold, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that this was the turning point. Either they would succeed, or everything would fall apart. He glanced at Zalara, and she gave him a small, determined nod. She was ready. Zalara took another step forward, her voice rising with authority. I am not asking for the destruction of our traditions. I am asking for the freedom to choose. If we are to build a future with our allies, we must first look to ourselves and ask whether we are willing to evolve. There was silence for a moment, and then another voice spoke up from the back of the room. She is right. Our traditions must adapt, or we will be left behind. It was one of the younger nobles, a man in his early 20s, standing tall among the crowd. Soon, others began to speak up, their voices joining the growing tide of support. The room began to shift, the balance of power slowly tilting. Elder Valeth's expression darkened, but it was clear that he was losing the argument. The will of the people, especially the younger generation, was becoming impossible to ignore. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Valeth stood, his robe swirling around him as he glared down at Adam and Zalara. Very well. If you wish to defy tradition, so be it. But know this, you are setting a dangerous precedent. The future you speak of may not be as bright as you believe. Zalara's eyes burned with defiance, but there was also a glimmer of hope. The future is ours to shape, Elder Valeth. It always has been. That evening, after the confrontation in the Grand Hall, Adam and Zalara found themselves on a balcony overlooking the sprawling crystal city of Serenith. The tension from earlier had lifted somewhat, though the future remained uncertain. The stars twinkled overhead, and the twin moons cast a soft silver glow across the landscape. Adam leaned against the railing, the cool night air soothing his nerves. "We did it," he said softly, still marveling at how things had played out. "We actually did it." Zalara stood beside him, her arms resting on the railing, her gaze distant. "It's not over yet. There will be resistance. There always is when change comes." Adam nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "But you've taken the first step. That's more than most people ever do." For a moment they stood in comfortable silence, watching the city below. Then, slowly, Zalara turned to him, her eyes filled with gratitude and something deeper. "Adam, thank you. I couldn't have done this without you." He smiled softly, reaching out to gently take her hand. "You could have. I just helped remind you of your own strength." Zalara's gaze lingered on him, and for a moment the air between them seemed to still. There was something unspoken in the way they looked at each other, something neither of them was quite ready to name. But for now, it was enough. The following days brought a mixture of relief and uncertainty. Word of Zalara's defiance spread quickly across Zithoria, rippling through every level of society. In the capital city of Serenith, younger Zithorians, particularly those who had long wished for change, whispered of the princess who had dared to challenge the elders. In contrast, the older, more conservative factions muttered of the dangers this rebellion could bring. For Zalara, the aftermath was both a victory and a burden. She had taken the first step toward breaking free of the ancient traditions, but now she was faced with the task of navigating the political and social consequences of her choice. It was not enough to simply defy the ritual. Now she had to live with the repercussions of her actions. Adam stayed by her side, a constant source of support as she dealt with the fallout. He too understood that the peace between Earth and Zithoria hung in a delicate balance. The elders had agreed to let the life debt tradition be questioned, but that didn't mean the matter was settled. Far from it. One evening, a few days after the dramatic confrontation in the Grand Hall, Zalara found herself standing in the palace gardens, the soft glow of the crystal and flowers casting light across the scene. Adam approached from the side, his footsteps barely audible against the smooth path. "Zalara?" he called softly. She turned, her silver-toned skin glowing faintly in the evening light. "Adam," she greeted, her voice gentle but tinged with weariness. "I was just thinking about everything that's happened. It's overwhelming at times." He stepped closer, sensing her unease. "I can imagine. But you've done something incredible. You've given your people a chance to rethink their future." Zalara sighed, folding her arms as she looked out over the garden. "But have I really changed anything? The elders may have allowed my decision, but the old ways are still deeply rooted in our society. It will take more than one act of defiance to change that." Adam reached out, gently touching her shoulder. "Change doesn't happen overnight. It takes time, and it takes courage. What you did was the first step, and the rest will follow. There are already people like Elder Mira, who believe in a different future. They'll help guide Zithoria through this." Zalara turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the soft light of the garden. "And what about us, Adam? What happens now?" There was a vulnerability in her voice, a quiet question that hung between them. Adam paused, searching her face for the answer he wasn't entirely sure of himself. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice soft. "But I do know that I'll stand by you, whatever comes next." Her expression softened, and for a moment the weight of the world seemed to fall away. In that small, quiet space, it was just the two of them, two people from different worlds, connected by something far deeper than tradition or duty. "Thank you," she whispered, her hand reaching up to touch his, "for everything." The next day, Zalara was summoned to the council chambers once more, this time not to stand in defiance, but to discuss the future of Zithoria's laws. To her surprise, the tone in the room had shifted. Elder Mira and several other younger council members had gained new influence, thanks in part to the ripple effect of Zalara's actions. "The council has agreed to consider reforms," Elder Mira told her after the meeting had concluded. "We will begin by allowing certain traditions, like the life debt, to become optional. It will take time, and there will be resistance, but the first steps have been taken." Zalara felt a wave of relief, though it was tempered by the knowledge of how much work still lay ahead. "Thank you, Elder Mira," she said, bowing slightly. "I'm grateful for your support." Mira smiled, her eyes gleaming with a quiet confidence. "It is you who gave us the strength to push for these changes, Princess. Your courage inspired us all. I believe the future of Zithoria is brighter because of you." That evening, as the palace settled into the quiet rhythm of night, Adam and Zalara found themselves on the balcony again, looking out over the sparkling city of Serenith. The stars were bright overhead, and the twin moons hung low on the horizon, casting a gentle glow over the world below. "So what happens now?" Adam asked, echoing the question that had lingered between them since the confrontation. Zalara smiled softly, the tension in her shoulders easing. "Now, we rebuild. The council has agreed to begin reforming the old laws. It won't be easy, and there will be resistance, but the first steps have been taken." Adam nodded, feeling a sense of pride in what Zalara had accomplished. "You've done something incredible, Zalara. You've changed the course of your entire society." She glanced at him, her expression thoughtful. "I didn't do it alone. I couldn't have done it without you." Adam smiled, but his tone remained serious. "You didn't need me to save you, Zalara. You were strong enough to do that on your own." She reached out, taking his hand in hers. "Maybe, but having you by my side made all the difference. I never would have had the courage to stand up to the elders if I hadn't known you believed in me." They stood in silence for a moment, the cool night air brushing against their skin. The future was uncertain, but for the first time Zalara felt like it was a future she could shape, a future she had chosen for herself. "What will you do now?" she asked softly. Adam looked out at the horizon, his mind turning over the possibilities. "I don't know. I suppose I'll return to Earth at some point, but—" He trailed off, his gaze shifting back to her. "I'm not in any hurry." Zalara's heart fluttered at his words, a warmth spreading through her chest. She had always thought of her life as one bound by duty and expectation, but now, with Adam by her side, she felt the stirrings of something new, something she had never allowed herself to hope for. "Stay," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "For a little while longer." Adam smiled, squeezing her hand gently. "I think I can manage that." And as they stood there, under the watchful gaze of the twin moons, the weight of tradition finally began to lift, replaced by the promise of a future forged by choice, by freedom, and by the bond they had created together.